Alrighty, good morning, my friends. I hope you guys are feeling good, ready to go. We have all kinds of exciting things to talk about today. Um, we're actually going to start out talking about re-talking about edge flow and the importance of the shape of the faces on our polygon geometry. And we're also going to delve into some new tools that you can use to help you with your modeling process with some of the more challenging things you may come across. And again, these are not tools that are going to like change your world in terms of modeling, but they're tools that are handy and can make a difference with something that you're struggling with. So they're just nice little accessories to add to your utility belt of cool stuff you know how to do. And again, in terms of trying to create some of the more complicated shape and form elements of the models you're building, particularly going into week 3 turn in, which is going to be the more challenging of the stuff that you guys have had to produce up to this point. So let's see, what are we getting? Oh, yes, proper use. That's what we're going to be talking about today. The proper use of some tools that are largely used poorly. All right, so things first, let's talk about edge flow and the importance of edge flow. And we're going to talk a little bit about some terms and make sure we understand that. Again, the idea that edge flow within your geometry is sort of the structure of shape and form. And much like the girders fleshed out for you the shape and form of what a building will look like, the edge flow of your geometry is the same thing, support and structure. And I know that we try to make whatever it is we're making, have it be four-sided faces whenever and wherever possible. And I know at times it feels like, well, heck, that's a limitation and I can't build anything I want to. But the reality of the situation is you can build anything you want, but it is an added level of challenge when things have to be four-sided whenever and wherever you can. Hopefully today it'll make more sense why we do those things. All right, so first things first, the shapes of the faces. Again, we're going to talk about the shapes of the faces in our polygon geometry from ideal to less than ideal, because in some instances it actually makes a difference, particularly when we're talking about deformation or deformation, depends on who you talk to. Now, in terms of four-sided faces, they don't have to be perfect squares. All of these qualify as four-sided faces. And again, in terms of the rendering process, whatever rendering engine you use takes four-sided faces and turns it into two triangles. So that kind of keeps that process faster and more efficient because squares turn into two triangles mathematically, quickly, and very easily. In terms of your tools, again, some of your tools don't function on non-quadrant faces. So that can be really frustrating when you can't figure out why tools are not operating properly. And again, not having four-sided faces can lead to that kind of problem. But one of the things that affects us a lot in terms of the shape of the faces is how the geometry deforms or changes shape. In some instances, you're modeling things that don't bend or change shape, like a door, you know, unless it's some kind of cartoony door, you know, pretty much they don't bend and change shape. But many objects do change shape. And it doesn't have to be skin. When we say organic, in terms of geometry, skin, obviously, organic comes to mind in terms of changing shape. But also, if you look at, you know, the little strap for your badge that's hanging on here, if this is modeled out of polygon geometry, this would change shape and therefore qualify under organic. And the structure of the edge flow could affect the behavior of this geometry. Now, where it comes into play the most is when things change shape, particularly once we get into the rendering phase, where we're actually creating those final images. Now, in terms of a polygon face, we've already talked about the idea that each face comes with a component that reads light. What did we say was the name of that component? What is that thing? The normals, right? So the normals read light, and they tell Maya how to light the face. You know, full light, partial light, no light, reflected light, whatever it happens to be situationally. So those normals are reading light information. Now, in an object that deforms well or changes shape well, the polygon geometry will bend and move, and there'll be a nice gentle transition between one shape and the next. So when that face changes shape, it's smooth and gentle. What happens is with that nice shape of the faces, the light transition is also smooth and gentle. So things that were not receiving any light are dark, and then as they move to where they would be receiving light, there's a slow and gentle transition that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, with poorly shaped faces, what happens is when that geometry starts to bend and change shape, we get a sort of a popping or a flashing that takes place because your geometry goes from being shaded to lit very quickly. So it's an abrupt change rather than a gradual one. Does that make sense? So ultimately what that looks like when you're creating your final render on whatever it is that you are creating, your project, you'll see a part of the geometry that's changing shape, and then suddenly there's like a flash. It looks like something lit up, like magic sparkle in that area. And that's because the geometry's transition from one phase to the other was not a gentle one, but a very abrupt one. And as you know, when you're looking at an image as a human being, we are drawn to the lightest aspect of any image. So if there's any popping or flashing going on with regard to the lighting on your geometry, that's where we're going to look because we think something's up. Does that make sense? So the shape of the face can really affect it, again, particularly when we're dealing with geometry that changes shape. Does that make sense at all? Okay. Also, with regard to the change itself, geometry actually, when it's built properly and has nice edge flow, when it does change shape, it changes shape more predictably and less awkwardly. And to give you an idea of an awkward shape change, you guys have all had those straws from McDonald's, right? Those big, huge plastic straws. You know, they're great for making little, roll up the tip of it and hit your friend in the eye. But in terms of those plastic straws you get at McDonald's, when you bend those, right, you try to bend them at half, what happens is they pinch really hard, right? And like if you could imagine a straw when it bends, that's not what an arm looks like when it bends. Does that make sense? So that straw will bend, you get that nasty pinch, and then on either side it kind of bows out. You get those sharp like corners on it. And if you're not seeing these things, go to McDonald's immediately following this lecture and bend some straws and watch. But what you'll see is it kind of bends out in these crazy triangle shapes, right? It's not what an arm would look like when it bends. So, but think about straws that you've used that are built for bending, right? Those weird crinkly ones. You bend those and they're still in a tubular shape, right? There's a smooth transition there. So the way they are structured affects the way they change shape. Geometry is the same kind of thing. Depending on the structure of the edge flow, if it changes shape, you're going to see that. And edge flow is dictated by the shapes of the faces. Does that make sense at all? A little bit? Okay, good. So the shapes of the faces are very important. Now, as I said, these are all four-sided faces and would qualify as quadded. These are also four-sided faces, right? They look like triangles. So if you're thinking, oh, I can't make that shape because I have to have four-sided faces, those are four-sided faces. They have four sides because this vertice makes that two edges, not one. So that would fall under quadded. Does that make sense? So you can still do it. Doesn't mean you can't do it just because you're limited with the shape choices. It just makes it a little bit harder. Now, where we start getting into shapes that are not ideal, if you take a look, this does have four sides, but you can see this vertice is kind of interior to the other vertices. We're getting a really awkward shape there, and that's going to deform very poorly given the opportunity to do so. And in terms of the lighting, not such a good math result in either one of these. And we talked about non-planar faces, faces that have a bend in them, but there's no edge to support that bend. So obviously those aren't good either in terms of the way the light is on that surface and if it changes shape at all, obviously going to be problematic. Now, with those limitations, if you view them as limitations, you might think, oh, this room is too complicated. Like, look at all those crazy shape changes in there. Look at all that edge flow that it would take to build that thing. But if you take a look, you can see those shapes are all in there. Those are all four-sided entities. So you can achieve anything shape-wise, even under the parameters of gotta have four sides. It is still doable. It's a little bit harder, and therein lies the challenge, you know, ability level as a modeler, but it can still be done. Yes. Well, it wouldn't be that what you're talking about is any kind of limits due to like game parameters, like the game engine, not necessarily pixels in terms of modeling, but much more so in terms of faces, if that makes sense. Because again, the process for a movie that we go see is your computer is drawing for you a picture of Optimus Prime, right? We want Transformers, right? So it's drawing a picture of Optimus Prime for me. And it takes a certain amount of time to draw Optimus Prime. And in terms of that drawing time, just like us, a simple drawing I can draw very quickly. A complex drawing takes me a lot longer to draw because there's more detail. When I'm seeing a picture that a computer drew that's going to be in a movie, it doesn't matter how it took for a computer to draw it because that movie's not going to open for a year or two. So time I've got. Does that make sense? Versus when you're playing a video game, your computer is drawing for you. I mean, heck, even your Maya interface right now is just drawings, but it's drawing for you in what we call real time. It has to be. Otherwise, we don't feel like we are controlling the game. It's more like we're watching a movie, like a cutscene. But every time my character moves, I see something different. The computer has to draw that different thing that I see and the transition frames in between to make it look like fluid movement. Does that make sense? So the number of polygons on the screen does limit how quickly it can draw based on processor speed. That's why handheld games, the graphics aren't as cool as the bigger units, which have a lot more math they can do more quickly. And the math is what helps them draw. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, there is an instance where pixels come into play, and that's just in terms of texture sizes. We haven't gotten into texturing, but just like there are poly limits, there are texture limits. You can only have so big of a texture applied and still have it be able to draw instantly. So under those same parameters, everything has limitations because it has to draw in what we call real time, which means things change instantly. Does that make sense at all? Was that what you were looking for in an answer, or did I totally miss? Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. Yes and no. Very important for you to realize is when you are modeling assets for a video game, you actually model in triangles, not four-sided. Because as we've discussed, when we are modeling assets that are going to be in a movie, the rendering engine takes the squares and turns them into two triangles, right? That's math that has to take place to do that. So if things need to render in real time, I don't have time to do math to turn squares into triangles. I start with triangles from go. Does that make sense? The entire model is triangulated in advance so that that process doesn't have to take place. Does that make sense at all? That's why when you look at assets for a video game, it's all triangles. So they literally build them in triangles to cut out the computation time to take it from four to two triangles. Does that make sense? Was I closer to the mark on that one? So that's why models are described for video games in terms of tries, TRI, how many tries in that model, because it is constructed of triangles. Absolutely. Yes. Well, it's one or the other. You're definitely either in the cutscene or you are in the game. Yeah, it has to translate. They're two separate elements, because the idea is basically a movie, and they could you blend it so it transitions into a real-time aspect of the game? Sure, but the cutscenes are definitely pre-generated pieces that again are meant to entertain or get you to buy the game. Because I mean, let's be honest, how many video games have you bought? Cutscene was awesome. No, that happens all the time. Actually, a friend of mine, a friend of mine who will remain nameless, and he works for a company that will remain nameless. One of their specialties is creating cutscenes for video games. And he called me up one day. He's like, "Oh, you got to see this totally awesome cutscene I just made." And I said, "Wait a minute. Is this one of those cutscenes that's straight up animation that you did, and I get all excited and I buy the game and it stinks?" And he went, "Yeah." You. But anyway, yeah, that's a teaser. I hate when that happens. I'm not going to name any games. I'm not going to name any companies or people. But what I can tell you is it happens, and I'm a victim as much as anybody else. But they are cool. I do like the cutscenes; those are pretty neat. But what is nice is when you're not sure, is it a cutscene or am I playing? And then you are playing, and you're like, yes, because the idea is, and that's a very delicate veil of illusion that is created by the game. So you have to be good at that. You have to be very careful with how you present that material, because if it looks like it's separate, it's like a disconnect. If that makes sense, you don't. Oh yeah, I'm playing a game. That's right. Versus when you think you're really in there. And so that happened to me a couple times. I was like, I want to go to bed, but all I can hear is the music that they play while you're being hunted by dinosaurs. Anyway, my own personal issues aside. Back to the shapes of the faces and the edge flow. Very important for that geometry to have good quality edge flow and nice shaped faces. Many things benefit from those thought processes. Does that make sense at all, though? Okay. Now, for those of you who are like, whoa, what was that crazy talk about video games? Aren't you glad that somebody asked that question? Because it gives you one more piece as to how some of this stuff works. And that's why I always encourage you guys to ask questions, because I'll actually go into something that I wasn't planning on talking about, and time permitting, that's just bonus stuff for you guys to figure out. Does that make sense? And learn. And I think it helps. There's a couple of different reasons. Probably one of the biggest ones for you, because you are the modeler, is some of the tools don't work on triangulated faces. So if it's not quadded, you're going to have issues with some of your tools. So that will affect you immediately directly. Does that make sense? So that's kind of a problem. When it comes to animation, again, if the geometry changes shape, triangulated geometry does not bend smoothly and nicely. Again, if you look at a movie and you look at a video game and you look at how the characters, when the arms bend at a video game, you get a lot of crazy like pinching and intersecting. It looks like the characters are made of like a hard plastic rather than a nice smooth skin. Does that make sense? So that's what you're seeing, is the limitation of the shape of the polygon faces in combination with the limit of the number of faces you can actually use. Does that make sense at all? Absolutely affect the behavior. Does that make sense? Okay. Are you just agreeing with me, so I'll stop talking about that? Okay. No, that's fine. It's just, honestly, and again, it's one of those things where even if it doesn't make sense yet, a couple of classes from now, like, bing, the bulb will go on and you go, oh, that's what the heck he was talking about. I'll have to tell him thanks because I get it now. And that's okay. I'm all right with that. If everything I say doesn't make sense right now, I'm okay with that, because the next time you hear that, you're not going to be worried about the terms, right? You're like, oh yeah, I've heard those terms before, I get it. Now the concept can get in there. Does that make sense? So I will broach subjects that are a couple of tiers high for this level, just so that you can have heard those before, if that makes sense at all. Okay. But I love when you guys ask questions, because then I know you're thinking. Yeah.
Maybe move the mic there.
Oh, okay. Can I move the mic? How about there? Is that working?
And your pocket's full.
My pocket is glowing? Oh, yeah, that would be the robot in my pocket telling me it's time to gamble.
All right.
Yeah, there's money to be made.
All right. I hope you don't win. Then I'll have to do this next week.
No, if I win, I'm saving everybody.
All right.
Yes, I'm saving everybody. Everybody.
Wait, where's that place in Alaska we're going?
Yeah, yeah, we're going out to Alaska. We have to name. I'm gonna buy. You know what though? I'm not gonna buy Alaska.
No.
It's too cold. It's beautiful. I love the nature. I love the natural resources there. It's just gorgeous. But I'm not a cold guy. As you can tell, I'm not a fan of clothes. So if I have to wear more, I'm not happy. So yeah, but I'm still saving everybody. But we're getting an island. Yeah, no, totally an island. Turquoise water, white sand. Yep. All right. But until I win, we're going to talk about polygons. Okay, now, again, those edges of your polygons, they help create the structure and the form. And again, just the neat placement and use of this edge looping not only gives you geometry that's easier to UV map, which is what we're going to be talking about on Saturday, but again, it's going to make your tools work better. And it just, honestly, your work looks like you know what you're doing. You come across as more professional. And have you guys ever taken a look at a modeler's demo reel? Have you guys looked at that? Okay, don't do it now because we're busy. But when you're on your break and not working on Maya, which I can't imagine how that would happen, but let's assume, do yourself a favor and look up modeling or modeler demo reel 2018. And you'll see what a demo reel or a portfolio looks like for somebody who's trying to get a job as a modeler. And what you will notice is that there is a segment of their demo reel devoted to showing the wireframe of their models. Because what they want to show is, not only do I model well, look at how gorgeous this thing is, but look at how beautiful the edge flow is. Look at, this is something that you can animate. This is something that's going to be easier to UV map and texture. This is going to be something that will do well when we rig it. You know, and those are the important things because it's much harder to make functional geometry. If pretty is your only objective, you're trying to make a statue, okay, that's great. But if this is part of a CG production pipeline and this is a working asset and it's got to do stuff, there are certain parameters under that. And that's the kind of stuff that we're teaching you with the edge flow and the edge looping processes, so that we make sure we're making something that is functional. Does that make sense at all? Because there's a big difference between looks good and works sometimes. And we're trying to get both of those in the same package. So again, edge flow becomes very important on a number of different levels. How's it sound, by the way, now that I put this thing on my hat?
Much better.
They like it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The hat it is. Now, something that I do want to impress upon you with your edge flow and your modeling is the idea that it is true when you're modeling, you have to create some abrupt changes in shape. That's going to happen. You know, objects are interesting when there's changes in shape. But what I'd like you to think of polygon geometry, think of it kind of like water. If you imagine a body of water, when you drop a little droplet into the water, at the point of impact, you get the biggest splash, right? The biggest rings, the ripples. But as those ripples move their way out, they get smaller and more faint, and they just sort of flow back into the surface of the water. Polygon geometry, similar to that, in that you're going to have abrupt changes of shape. But what I'd like you to try to think of is, how do I sort of feather and ease that shape change into my edge flow and the rest of my model, again, to just have a more gentle transition afterward. And again, that's where you get that nice spacing, nice neat and clean edge looping, nice shape of the faces, regardless of whatever it is you have to build. Does that make sense a little bit? I know it's kind of deep and mystical, maybe, but it's a good thought process in terms of nice Gesundheit edge flow and good quality models. Now, one of the things that I want you guys to be able to do is not only model well, but be able to talk about your models and what's going on, because oftentimes, particularly in an interview situation, you might be asked about things that you did or decisions you made with things that you built. And it's very important that you be able to use some of these terms, and that's why I want to touch on them again and make sure we understand the difference between them. Edge loop is a continuous loop of edges. It basically flows through the entire model and it connects back to itself. So it doesn't stop. It's a constant flow through the model, and that's when we're talking about edge loops and edge looping. Versus edge flow, which is talking about the shape and form of the object, the structure, again, the support element of it, which they tend to terminate. It's not like a continuous thing, but they represent the structure or the girders like you would see in a building, a shape and form. It holds that stuff together. All right. Now, the reason we went into great detail again with the edge looping, edge flow, and the importance of all these things is because we are going to learn about some tools today that are very destructive to edge looping and edge flow and face shapes. We are going to talk about the highly controversial Booleans operations. Ooh, Booleans. Ooh, Booleans. Now, in terms of the Booleans, there's two camps on Booleans. One is, yeah, use them, who cares? As long as the shape is right, you're good. And the other camp is, don't even talk about them. They are the devil's playground. I don't ever want to see or hear that anybody is using them. I offer a third camp. The third camp is, yeah, they're dangerous. Yeah, most people don't use them right. But what if we teach them how to use it right? Maybe it could be a tool that will get them out of a trouble spot that they can't find another way out of. So let's be smart about them. So that's my angle on the Booleans. Again, many people use them. Very few use them well or properly. So that's what we're going to delve into today. Smart use of Booleans operations. And again, the reason I have to warn you about them is because, again, they tend to totally destroy the edge flow of your models. They are very reckless, very reckless. But sometimes something good comes from it. So it's important to not say that, don't pretend they don't exist, but realize you got to be careful with them. Kind of like knives, you know what I mean? Knives are real. I know they're real. I've seen them. There's some at my house. They're right next to the forks. But the point is, literally and figuratively, you're going to find the knives. So I'm going to show you how to use a knife properly so you don't hurt yourself or someone else. Does that make sense? So we're going to get into knife wielding. No, we're going to talk about Booleans. And in some instances with the Booleans operations, it actually makes a difference which piece of geometry you select first. So just be aware of that when we are using these tools. And I'm going to demonstrate for you. I want to make sure Brian can see this okay, and you guys can see this okay. Can you guys see that all right? Everybody? Okay, cool. And Brian, can you see that okay? Can my online friends see that? No? Shoot. I hate when that happens. Maybe I can.
Markero, the biggest marker ever.
Markero, the biggest mark. Shoot, if that cable was longer or that
I
was
know.
wireless, I'd just take it with me. I'd put that on the other side of my hat.
There you go.
You know what? That's what I need
Yeah.
is one of those GoPros on my head. And we could just run it like that. They would all be nauseous. 10 minutes in, they'd be barfing. All right, so let's take a look. The Booleans, in terms of where do they live, are under mesh, right up near the top. You will see mesh. And then there's the union, the difference, and the intersection. Those are the three different Booleans operations. All right, the first one we're going to talk about is the union operation. And the union operation is basically what I'm telling Maya is, here are two pieces of geometry. I want you to fuse them together. And now they are one thing, not two. And then what Maya does is it takes everything that is on the inside of both of those objects and it completely destroys them. It deletes them. They're totally gone. They're vaporized. So for example, if I've got these two spheres and I bring them together and I select them both and I run my Booleans union operation, what Maya does is it removes the inside because we know Maya likes its geometry sort of hollow on the inside, so I can't have any pieces in there. So it deletes it all out, and again, it fuses these two things together as one now. How many of you guys have seen Frankenstein? Any Frankenstein movie, the really old ones or the new ones? Those are all out there. So if you haven't seen a Frankenstein movie, you should, but the premise is some crazy guy goes and digs up dead people, cuts off various pieces, sews them all together to make one person. And then, of course, lightning wakes it up and it runs amok in the town and, torches and pitchforks later, chaos ensues. But the idea there is the guy found pieces of stuff and stuck them together and tried to make it a single entity. And it was very unnatural, right? Obviously. Booleans are kind of like that. They're an unnatural operation. I'm doing freaky things. I'm dabbling with stuff maybe humans shouldn't be dabbling with when I'm doing Booleans operations. So sometimes you get really weird results that don't make any sense. But again, what Maya does is it takes whatever's on the interior and gets rid of it. So you can see it. What I did was I took a sphere and I stuck it into my Lego guy's chest. Selected the sphere and my chest and ran mesh Booleans union. So all of the parts of my chest that are hidden by the sphere, the buttons on my shirt, the pocket, does that make sense? All of that gone, disintegrated, fused together with the sphere. The parts of the sphere that would be inside my chest, gone, disintegrated, totally fused. My back looks just like my front. There's a little bit of the sphere sticking out the back. Does that make sense? The rest of the sphere is gone. Whatever of my back is covered by the sphere, gone. Totally gone. Now, when you look at this is one object now. Does the edge flow look good on that? Am I looking at quadded faces? Dude, right? I'm looking at like really bad geometry. Yeah, it's fused together. Yeah, that's the shape if I'm trying to make me with a weird alien in my chest. But bad edge flow is the end result in terms of that geometry. So it did kind of do it, but it looks wacky. Let's get into the next one. Boolean's intersection. Intersection is sort of the opposite of union. Intersection is saying, okay, let's take these two things, let's make them one, but I'm going to get rid of the outside of everything. I'm only going to keep the inside of everything. So again, if I take these two spheres and I stick them together, this sphere, all the outside, gone. This sphere, all of the outside, gone. And it just saves what was on the inside. So again, same situation. I take a sphere, I stick it into my Lego guy's chest. Boolean's intersection. The part of the sphere that was covering my chest, gone. The part of my chest that was covering the sphere, gone. And it fused my chest with the sphere. So now they are one entity, one piece of geometry. And again, does that edge flow look good there? Do the edges here connect with edges anywhere? No, it's like it's a disaster, right? So again, dramatic shape change, yes. Did I fuse them together? Yes. Do I have good quality geometry at this point? No, not anymore. Yes.
Say that it destroys the outside part or the inside part. Are you saying it replaces it?
It deletes it. It literally does not exist anymore.
Oh. I was just wondering because like I just would assume that it replace it with its own type of geometric flow, but I don't know. You said that it deletes it. Then what does it do to like fix it?
It doesn't fix it. That's the problem. And that's what I mean. It's an extremely reckless tool to use. But if your goal is, I want to take these two pieces of geometry and make them one, and I don't care about edge flow or edge quality or whether or not my tools work or the math that Maya needs to make this stuff happen, or what happens if I have to render it, well, then this is fine. But typically, again, and this is where the problem comes in. I think people who utilize the Booleans incorrectly and they make videos and then put them on YouTube for you to watch, they're not lighting and rendering this stuff. They're just modeling. They're like, yeah, it's done, looks great. But this is not pipeline. You can't use this in a pipeline because other people have to UV map and texture this. It's okay.
No company would even accept this.
Like this is not good CG production pipeline work, if that makes sense. It gets the job done, but yes, that's exactly right. Purely shape and form, it may create what you need, shape and form, but it's not functional. It won't work in a pipeline because it's going to have problems somewhere, whether it's you or the next person or the next discipline down. Somewhere there's going to be issues. And again, the people who demonstrate it on YouTube and what have you, they're not under those kind of criteria. So yeah, shape and form, got it, done. So that's why I say YouTube is a great resource to access for information, but some stuff you got to go, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound right. And you have to find other sources to corroborate or refute, if that makes sense. That would be like taking one person's word on a situation. If there's something happening in the world, you don't read one paper, talk to one person, and then formulate your opinions on that. You got to go to other resources. You got to find the background behind that and make sure that you fully understand the picture. You can't go by just what one person said. They might be right, but that's a risk. All right, so this is what the intersection looked like again. It gets rid of the outsides and it keeps the insides. Now the third one, the difference operation. And this is the one where it actually makes a difference which one you select first as the result you get. So the way I like to describe the difference is I'm basically using one piece of geometry to take a bite out of another one. Literally chomp. So for example, I select these two spheres and I run the difference operation. Maya will get rid of one object and whatever aspect of that object is intersecting or working with the first object. It literally takes a bite out of it. So again, the idea here, I take a sphere, stick it into my guy's chest, select the sphere in the chest, difference, the sphere is totally gone, totally gone. My chest is now a vacuous hole because wherever that sphere was like a black hole, just everything's gone. Very limited horizon on this black hole, but that stuff is just instantly vaporized. And you can see a little bit of the sphere in there, but you can see the edges are not lining up there either. It's like it cauterized me, burned a hole in me and cauterized it. All right. Now that we've got these ideas in our head, you know I have an activity for us to play with, right? So we can see how this actually works. Because it's, did you? Good. Here we go. So we're going to go to our Booleans activity. So please set your projects to the activity file folder. File, set project. We choose our activity files. Now I go to File, Open Scene, and I want my Booleans activity. Now, the Booleans activity, it's got playful Easter colors, but the reason I colored the geometry is so that you can see the two different elements and what happens when you actually run the tool. So keep an eye on the colors because that'll be a good indication of what has been saved from each object. So in terms of the first thing we're going to talk about, it's basically the same thing 3 times. I've got 3 cylinders that are stuck, about 2/3 of the way into 3 cubes. So let's look at the different operations. All right, first of all, we're going to take a look at the union operation. So I have a cylinder and I have a cube, and I want to create this kind of shape. But obviously it's kind of difficult to extrude a cylinder out of a cube. Not at all impossible, and actually it's probably easier than you think, but you might look at that and go, oh, that's impossible, I can't do that. So what is one workaround? Well, let's try this Booleans thing. So the way the union tool works is we select one piece of geometry and then shift select the other, or marquee get them both, it doesn't matter. Order is not important with the union tool. We go to Mesh, Booleans, Union. And what happens is, and I'll show you in the side view so you can see it a little bit easier, Maya takes the part of the cylinder that is inside the cube and it just nips it right off, gone. Deletes it. And then what it's doing on the inside, I'll go in here, inside the cube, and you can see that the part of the cube that was inside the cylinder is now gone. So you can literally look up into the cylinder from inside the cube. Now you will notice it is fused together, and Maya did kind of try to connect it. You see it put a couple of edge loops in there, a couple of edges, but obviously we're dealing with some serious n-gons here that will have to be dealt with. But like I said, Maya is trying to get it to work. And let me just see what happens when I start trying to pull this up. You can see I'm starting to get some weird stuff going on already. All right, let's take a look at the next one. For this one, we're going to use the Booleans intersection. And if you recall from the intersection, what we're doing there is we're taking kind of what from each object is on the inside. So if I grab both, Mesh, Booleans, intersection, you'll see what Maya is doing is basically removing the square or the cube and the cylinder that's outside the cube, but it's keeping the inside. So it's just nipping off the cylinder and getting rid of the cube. And if you take a look, you can see the cylinder is green and the cube is yellow. So you can see it saved the part of the cube that's on the inside, and it sort of sealed the top of the cylinder with it. And then the inside of the cylinder remains. Now, the last one we're going to look at is the Boolean's difference, and that's the one where we're using one piece of geometry to bite out of the other one. So if I grab the cylinder, shift select the cube, and this is the one where the order is important. It depends on which one you pick first. So if I grab the cylinder first, then the cube, mesh Boolean's difference, we're using the cube to take a bite out of the cylinder. So the cube disappears and the cylinder that's inside it disappears. And it sort of seals the bottom with part of the cube. Now, opposite order. Let's grab the cube first and then the cylinder. Mesh Boolean's difference. Now it's using the cylinder to take a bite out of the cube. And again, Maya's trying to connect this stuff. We've got some edge looping in there, but it's obviously something I'm going to have to fix because I've got two big honking n-gons on there for sure. All right. You guys able to see and do these? Okay. Anybody see any weird stuff happening? Weird shading? Faces, weird shading? Any faces disappearing? Okay, because that stuff happens, so don't be upset. I have to warn you up front. As I said before, Booleans are a bit of an unnatural thing. So like if weird stuff happens, don't get bummed out. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your copy of Maya. Just weird stuff starts happening when we use Booleans operations. The example that I like to give is there was this one time I was building the fuselage of a plane and I was trying to get windows cut out of the entire fuselage of the plane. Similar shape, repetitive. I thought I could use Booleans to do it. My tool started acting weird. My geometry started like flashing and giving me this crazy shading. My file started to crash on me. It was having all kinds of problems. So I ended up having to export the geometry and bring it into a fresh file just because it was just acting weird because I was using Booleans. So don't feel bad if weird stuff starts happening to your file while you're working on it.
So it gives you all kinds of weird geometry and
Sometimes.
things up.
Sometimes. That is an excellent question. Why? Why on earth? In some instances, because there are instances where Booleans actually may be a really good solution for you. And I'm going to show you an example of where that would be helpful. But overwhelmingly, they're dangerous. I try not to use them if I can. I avoid it. This is a last ditch effort. But sometimes it does help. And that's why I want to show you. And again, there's a lot of people who will say, yeah, just use Booleans. But they're not using it right. So I want you to know how to use it properly so that you can use it in the instance that you have to, if that makes sense. Safe use. You know, like when I tell you, if you're going to hand a knife to someone, you hold the blade and hand them the handle, right? Simple thought process, but some people don't realize that. You know, you want a knife? Here you go. So we're going to try to be smart with them. Yes. Well, here's what I would say. On the one hand, it would be great if Maya understood the scope of the project you were working on and could incorporate that in its decision process, where you would end up with nicer edge flow. But what we're talking about there is applications that can think. And we don't want too much of that. A little bit of help is good. Too much help in that category is Skynet, which does not go well. And the reality of the situation is these processes are complicated, and that's almost job security, if that makes sense. If this was really easy, if this was an easy line of work and anybody could do it and the application did most of the work for you, anybody could do those jobs. The pay would be really bad, and it'd be so hard to get a job because everybody can do it. So yeah, it's frustrating, it's annoying at times, but thank goodness, because that means not everybody can do this. It's hard. So there's a value in it because it's not simple. Does that make sense? Not a long line of people waiting for pictures of stick figures to buy and hang in their living room, right? Because anybody can probably make a stick figure. So yeah, it's annoying. It'd be great if it did everything for me, but would it? Does that make sense? So thank goodness it's actually a little bit challenging. And I have to be honest with you, if it was too easy, it really wouldn't be any fun. It's much more fun because you have to actually use your brain. It's one of the things that I appreciate very much about working with Maya is that you got to think about stuff. And not only do you have to think about things, you have to think about how Maya thinks about them and then find a way to sometimes trick Maya into doing what you want by doing things not typically the way they're done. So I enjoy that challenge. It's frustrating sometimes, but I am so happy when I figure something out. I feel like I'm a champion. And I kind of like that aspect of it. But in terms of the weirdness that happens sometimes with the math, did I show you guys the math that Maya is doing? Look at this. You'll freak out when you see it. Every time we do something in Maya, everything we do, it's all math, right? When Maya is calculating out what we see and what we're doing, Maya is doing math 16 spaces to the right of the decimal point in terms of accuracy. That's the level of perfection we are asking Maya to do. Because in some instances, we're using this application to make real objects, right? Model pieces for cars or houses. And these things have to fit right. Does that make sense? Luckily, we're doing entertainment, so it doesn't really matter. But in some instances, these 3D applications are used to create real world objects. And if those pieces are not the right size and they don't fit together properly, deep water pressure suits implode. Does that make sense? So in terms of the math we are making Maya do, we ask a lot. So yeah, it's a little squirrely at times, but we ask a lot of it in terms of every little thing it does. So I give Maya slack because I don't like to figure out change. And Maya's going beyond that even. So, you know, do weird things happen sometimes? Sure, but there's actually a decent reason for it. And of course, we are working with cutting edge technology. And you know, anything cutting edge is not flawless. It's going to have its issues. And we're always pushing it to do bigger, better, more exciting things. And that means we're going into new areas, and that's going to have issues. Does that make sense at all? Okay, so yeah, it's frustrating, but it's part of the gig. It's okay. That's why they hire the best and the brightest to figure this stuff out. So incidentally, everybody was able to complete these Booleans things? You all had a result similar to this, if not the same? Okay, because again, weird stuff happens and that's okay. But here's what I want you to do. Here's where we're going to learn how to use this stuff in a smart way. Grab all this stuff and just delete it, send it into oblivion. And then go to this next layer and make that visible by clicking the V. And what we're going to talk about is what we can do to use these Booleans and have them actually work to our advantage. Because when it comes to working with the Booleans, we really have two approaches. One, we decide, you know what? I'm gonna fix it afterwards. Whatever happens, I'm just gonna fix it afterwards. I'm gonna quad everything out. I'm gonna put in new edge flow. I will make it work. Now, in terms of fixing quads and making everything four-sided and reconfiguring edge flow, what tool do we typically use for that? I think I heard it. Don't be shy. Multi-cut tool, there we go. Multi-cut tool is great for that, right? So our two options are A, do the Booleans operations, get the shape and form you need, and then go back and fix the edge flow. Make it work, make it right, make it better. Quad things. Does that make sense? Or plan B, which is more my favorite, prepare prepare the geometry in advance before you run these Booleans operations, knowing what it's going to do and create good geometry that way. And the latter tends to create better looking edge flow, better looking geometry. So let's look at both approaches. All right, number one. This is a somewhat challenging shape to make. Cylinder coming out of a cube, right? It can be done. It's not that bad. I've demonstrated it for you. And if you've done the advanced extrude exercise, you know, oh yeah, I remember we did that. But to someone who's not as proficient at the extrude tool, they might look at that and go, wow, I can't do that. So how do I make this into something that resembles that? Well, again, you can either do the Booleans and fix it, or prep it and then do the Booleans. So let's take a look at do the Booleans first and then fix it. So if I want to do that, I'm going to select my two pieces of geometry, mesh, Booleans, union. And what Maya's going to do is try to connect the two pieces to each other. And again, it did get rid of the part of the cylinder that was inside the cube, so it did fuse them together. But now I've got to go back and fix the problems. So I might have to get rid of this edge here and then get my multi-cut tool in there. And then I'm going to have to try to cut some new edges in there. Oh, watch that. You see how I put that edge in there and then suddenly a face opened up? All right. So again, sometimes some weird stuff happens, but we still have to try to find a way to fix it. You can see it doesn't even want to do it now. All right. I'm going to try to do it without deleting that edge. Bring that edge back. I'm just going to reconfigure the edge flow. And you guys, please try this as well. And just watch what I'm doing here. You see what I'm doing in terms of trying to fix this up, neaten it up, make it look a little bit better? Does that make sense? I'm trying to find a way to match these pieces to each other, because the reality of the situation is to properly attach two pieces of geometry, they have to have the same number of edges. So if there's 8 edges on my cylinder, there's got to be 8 edges to connect it to on my cube. Otherwise, they're not properly connected. All right. You guys able to have some success with this? Anybody have faces disappearing on them? A couple of you. Anybody getting any crazy shading going on? A couple of you. Okay. Anybody's file crashed completely? Not yet. Okay. That's good. We'll keep going. But you can see like weird stuff starts happening. And that's okay. That's not your fault. It has to do with the tools and how quirky they are. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's what I'm going to suggest. Number one, you can get some weird quirky results. So maybe not a good idea. Number two, in terms of the edge flow that I'm creating, you can see it's a little bit messy, right? The edge looping is a little awkward. It looks kind of like I stuck it together, like did my best to stick it together with duct tape and make it work. So it's not as neat, clean, and organized as some other stuff that I could show in terms of my ability level. So here's the other side of this. Okay, let's not fix it after. What if we prepare our geometry in advance so that it's ready to do what we want to do with it, and try that approach instead. So here I am. Again, I'm trying to get this cylinder and square thing to come together. And honestly, anytime I'm trying to use Booleans or I'm attaching pieces of geometry to each other, I like to have my geometry in wireframe on shaded mode. So what I'll do is I'll go to shading and choose wireframe on shaded. And that allows me to see the shaded geometry as well as the edges, because that's going to be the important part, is connecting the edges. So if I want to connect these two pieces of geometry to each other, obviously there's more edges on my cylinder than there are on my cube, so I need to remedy that, right? This needs to be able to connect. So what I'm going to do is take this piece of geometry and just move it out of the way, and I'm going to prepare this cube to attach the cylinder to it. And something I definitely want to point out is, you notice this geometry is frozen, right? Its transformations have been zeroed out. That means this is this geometry's home position. So I can move this piece wherever I want to, and when I plug in all zeros, it's going to go right back there. So one of the many reasons we freeze stuff, it can help us out even with modeling. So let me just move this over here, and I'm going to go back to this cube, and I need more edges, and my multi-cut tool is a great one for putting edges in. So I get my multi-cut tool, and I'm going to click, drag, drag, and cut that edge loop in there, and then click, drag, drag, and cut that in there. So now, when I bring my cylinder back over there, every edge on my cylinder has a edge to attach to on the cube. So now, when I select them both, Mesh Booleans Union, it fuses them together neatly and cleanly, and I've already got nice looking edge flow. That doesn't look so bad. That looks like somebody who knew a little bit about what they were doing actually did this. Does that make sense? So you can approach the Booleans by either fixing it after the fact or prep it before. And you can see the benefits of both. You know, one's faster, but it takes longer to fix. The other one looks neater, but it takes a little bit of prep time. So you're going to put some work in somewhere, no matter what you do. It's just, when do you want to do it, up front or on the back? All right. How did you guys do with this? Yes. There's still a possibility of weird stuff happening, but it's a lot less, I've noticed from my personal experience. I couldn't put a percentage on it, but I have found that when you prep it, it tends to have a better responsiveness to having that happen. But again, does that mean it will always work? No. Will there be instances where you may need to like export the geometry and bring it back in just because it's gotten squirrely and it's acting weird? Yeah, you might have to. Yeah, and again, that's why I don't use Booleans unless I have to. And there are some instances where you really do, but if I can avoid it, I do. I'm not happy with them. Yeah. Yep, just multi-cut this thing up. What I did was, if I've got that thing in place, I know where I need the edges so I can cut them in. Does that make sense? I kind of line them up first with the edges turned on so I can see them, and then I figure out what I need, and then I put them on there.
So that was still the same exact thing that you were before, not the one that you currently have selected, but the previous one.
This one, I put them together. I did the Booleans first, and then I got the multi-cut tool out and tried to fix it. That was the difference. Do I put the edges in first and then run the operation, or do I run the operation and try to fix the geometry that I end up with? Yep. There's going to be work either way. You can't avoid it. But it's like, how do you want to do it? The benefits of prepping it is it looks neater and cleaner. That starts to get messy and not so attractive. You know what I mean? But sometimes it's unavoidable. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking. All right. Now, so that being said, let's say I'm trying to create something kind of complicated, like a ladybug antenna out of nowhere. Ladybug antenna, maybe, hypothetically. All right. It would be really hard to take the cylinder of the ladybug stalk and extrude a sphere out of it, right? Because spheres, I hate this word, but spheres are perfect. So am I going to be able to pull a sphere out of a cylinder? Probably not. It would take some work. I could do it if I had a lot of time on my hands, because I'd have to make another sphere, put it behind it, and use that as an example and try to follow it. Hostile, right? Or what if I do this Boolean's operation? This could work. So if I've got a 20-sided cylinder, what do I need for my sphere? 20. It's got to match. Got to have the same number of edges. Also, very important, when you are trying to attach pieces of geometry to each other, try to work with even numbers of edges. You want to have like 20, 12, 8, 6, numbers that easily are even, because it's really hard when you're working with odd numbers of edges. It's really hard to connect things to each other. Try to always work in even. All right. Now, if I've got a 20-sided cylinder, I want to connect it. Of course, we're talking 20-sided sphere. And, you have to line them up, of course, because, Maya will let you connect them poorly. Maya will let you create n-gons. Doesn't care, right? So I have to be the one. I'm on quality control. I got to make sure these edges line up, right? Make sure they connect. Now, here's what I want to propose, though. Okay, pulling a sphere out of a cylinder, very hard. Hard to do. Booleans is the only solution. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you just need to think differently about how you're trying to create the shape and form. Is it hard to extrude a sphere out of a cylinder? Yeah, that's hard. Is it hard to extrude a cylinder out of a sphere? No, actually, that's quite easy. Let's take a look at that. What if, instead of trying to create this from that, what if I try to create this from that? So I'm going to do this same thing, but on this side. So what I'm going to do is grab the faces on the front of my sphere. And so you can see, looks kind of like an eyeball, right? Now, with those faces selected, I can do an extrusion. Now, the complication is, when I do an extrusion, the extrude tool is looking at the curvature of the faces. So when I do the extrusion, it's trying to use object space to create additional. So you're going to get this weird, kind of like a rocket ship cone or something, but it's going to sort of flare out as you do the extrusion. But that's because the extrude tool is currently operating on object space. However, I can change the way the extrude tool works. I can click this little icon right here, and it will switch from object space to world space. So now the tool is orienting based on its alignment in this 3D world that I'm working in, and things move on true axes, not taking into account the curvature of the faces. So now, when I pull this out, I can pull a cylinder straight out. And in terms of that curvature on the end of that, I could just switch to my scale tool and flatten it. So you thought would be really hard to do actually turns out to be not so hard at all. You just had to think about it differently. So what I'm putting out there for you guys to think about is, maybe Booleans are the solution, maybe, or maybe I just need to think about the problem differently. Maybe there's another way to do it, and that will give me what I want more easily. Does that make sense? Okay, so just kind of, again, it seems like voodoo. Sometimes it's just the way you're thinking about it that's not working for you, not necessarily the tool choice. All right. Now, with that in mind, oh, we did those Booleans operations. With that in mind, we're going to delve into some other tools in Maya for attaching pieces of geometry together, because they use a lot of the same thought processes and ideology. And you might be thinking, well, why are we learning sticking stuff together now? Why didn't we learn this at the beginning? And the problem is, this is not actually the most efficient or effective means of modeling. It really isn't. The best is just straight up extrude tool. When I told you guys on the third class, you know everything you need to know to model just based on these tools, I wasn't kidding. You can model anything from those three. But this is an alternative, something you can look into. And again, I didn't show you this first because then everybody would be trying to do this because they think that's easier, and that's actually not a good path. I wanted to put you guys on a good path to begin with, so we didn't talk about this yet. But it's something you have to acknowledge. In some instances, you do have to connect things to each other. So now that we're a little bit smarter, we got a little bit more under our belt in understanding, okay, now we can take a look at some of these things. So let's take a look at the combine tool and really the way it should be used. And then we're going to get into the bridge tool and some other fun stuff like that. So here's another exercise. We're going to open this guy up. Was everybody able to do this? You guys all had success with this thing? Okay, just want to make sure. So I'm going to open up the combine and separate activity. No need to save that. And you'll see the first layer here, I'm actually going to just hide that thing. We don't need that. I want to go to the second layer where we're actually trying to attach two things together. So I've got these two cubes, two pieces of geometry, whatever the heck they actually represent, doesn't matter. But let's say I'm trying to actually connect them to each other. The way we connect things to each other, one of the many ways, is through merging the vertices, right? You guys remember the merge tool? What was the most important aspect of the merge tool? Do you guys remember? Threshold. That's the key thing with the merge tool is threshold. However, little caveat with the merge tool, you can't merge things from two separate objects. Maya will not allow you to merge the vertices of two different things. So what we have to do is combine them first. So Maya thinks of them as one, and then we can merge the vertices. Then it's totally fine. So let's say I'm trying to connect these two cubes together. And what I want to do is basically create that. Does that make sense? That's my end goal. I want to connect these two things together. But what I have to be careful of is, and if we go inside, you'll see it. Actually, let me go to shading and choose X-ray. Do you see how there's a face here and a face there? Do you see those two? Right here and right there. We know as modelers, we're not supposed to have faces on top of each other, right? Who remembers what that's called? What is it called when you have two faces on top of each other? What's that? N-gon is faces with more than four sides. Also naughty, but that's not the one. Yeah, blanked on it. How about my online friends? You guys remember?
Lindsay's guessing laminar.
Yes, lamina faces. Very good. Wow. Good for Lindsay. That's awesome. We can't have faces on top of each other. That's lamina faces. That's right. One of those no-nos. Also, if you've got 1, 2, 3 faces sharing the same edge, what issue is that? You guys remember that one? Non-manifold. That's right, non-manifold. Had to go to my Mickey Mouse voice for that one. But yeah, non-manifold also no bueno, so we don't do that. So if I'm going to connect those to each other, I'm going to have to do something first. Did you? I got back. Okay. Now, in terms of connecting these guys to each other, we want that geometry to be nice and hollow. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the faces on the inside where it's going to connect. Right? So it's nice and hollow. Next, I'm going to connect, well, bad choice of words. I'm going to move the vertices to where I want them to eventually merge. And we're going to use some of Maya's snapping tools to do that. Very important to realize, snapping does not mean connecting. I mean, we think of snapping being connecting, right? Snapping our pants or what have you. But that's not what's going on. When we snap something to something else, they occupy the same space, but they're not connected. Does that make sense? We're using it to find a position. We're not actually gluing them together. Now, in Maya, if you look at your keyboard, there's a key there, V as in Victor. V activates Maya's snap to point function. Vertices are points, so I can use it to snap one vertice to another. So if I hold V and select a vertice, I got my move tool out. If I hold V, I've activated snap to point. I can drag the vertice with my left mouse button, and you can see it will try to snap to the vertices. As long as I hold down the left mouse button, I can try to get that vertice to snap to somebody, some vertice, anywhere. Does that make sense? As long as I hold it down. So I'm going to choose this point right here because I want that vertice to attach there. I'm going to grab this one and do the same thing. Hold V and drag, and it will snap to that vertice. And that's only because there's not many vertices to choose from, so it's going to go to them. It's easier to aim. If these two cubes had 47 sides each, it would be really hard to line them up. But because the geometry is pretty light, it's kind of finding its way. Hold V, drag, hold V, left mouse button, drag, and now they're lined up. Again, they are snapped to the same position, but they're not stuck together because if I grab them, you can see if I move them around, it looks open. So obviously they're not connected yet. So what I'm going to do now is here's where I'm going to combine them. And this is how you're supposed to use the combine tool. Select this, hold shift and select the other piece. So they're both selected, or you could marquee if you want. And then go to mesh and choose combine. So now that I've combined them, Maya thinks of it as a single entity. But the vertices are not attached yet, because if I grab the vertices and I move them, you'll see, oh yeah, they're still not connected. But Maya thinks of this as one object. So what I can do is grab all the vertices at the point where they need to connect and use my merge tool. Edit mesh merge. And you know we want to use a small number, because if we use a big one, they're just going to pinch, right? So what we want to do instead is use a very small number like 0.01, and we do our merge. And then we can select the geometry at the point of the merger and move it, and that's how it should look when it's properly connected. Does that make sense? So now that's connected. That's doing what it should. All right, everybody able to do that? That V snap to point thing and then combine and then merge? Okay, good, because we're going to go into some more tools that use a lot of this same ideology. So if you've got this, we'll get to the next guy. All right. Our next tool, I think you're going to dig this one. It's called the bridge tool. Kind of as its name implies, it allows us to connect two pieces of geometry. But basically what it does is, it's kind of like if you could imagine the extrude tool, kind of, because what it does is it actually creates more geometry and makes a bridge, literally, between the two pieces. So it's kind of cool. But it also has some other super fun functions that could help you out. So that's why we're going to show you this one too. All right, let's take a look at the bridge tool and how that works. Again, that's another activity on your in your activity file folder. So we're going to go to File, Open Scene, and choose a bridge activity. Bridge activity. There's activity on the bridge. All right. So again, I love my rainbow colored shapes. But let's take a look. Let's say I want to bridge between these two objects. Again, much like I did with that blue and green cubes. I still have to combine them because again, it works on that same idea. You got a bridge between the same object. So I'm going to select both pieces and go to Mesh Combine. Now, once it's combined, which is kind of weird when you think about it, because if I select one, they both light up, even though you and I can both see they're not, it doesn't look like they're physically connected. But what we've said is, Maya, think of this as one object. So the cool thing about the bridge tool is, if you recall when we were just, you know, combining and merging the vertices on two different objects, we had to delete the faces on the inside to get rid of them so it stayed hollow. The bridge, you don't have to do that. It does that for you. So what I'm going to do is just select the faces, this one and this one, hold shift so that you get them both. And then you go to Edit Mesh and choose Bridge. And it literally creates geometry between the two, a bridge, and it connects them. But what's neat is we get this interactive dialog box that goes with it. And, you know, that means fun stuff that we can play with. So the first thing is divisions. And again, this works kind of like the bevel tool. Remember, we had how many divisions were in there. So we created this new piece of geometry, and with the left mouse button, we can drag and increase the number of divisions that appear in between those two pieces of geometry. Now, you might be wondering, well, what do I need to increase the divisions for? It just kind of connects them. Well, there's some other capacities in there, like taper, which can alter the way we create geometry between the two. Make it look like it's breathing. So in terms of divisions, more divisions makes it smoother, fewer divisions, more angular. So depending on how you want that bridge to take place. And then there's also this really funky, which I never use, twist capacity, where you can put a little bit of a twist on your geometry. And of course, there's a, you know, taking it too far thing where it just kind of pinches. But kind of neat, some of the weird stuff you can do using this bridge tool. It's kind of fairly diverse in terms of its behavior. All right. And again, I had to combine the objects, and again, they had to have the same number of edges in order for it to work. Everybody able to get that first one? We good? All right, let's look at this second one here. You might be thinking, okay, so the objects have to be the same size to the bridge. Not at all. They can be two totally different sizes. Really, the big ticket item is they got to have the same number of edges. That's the one thing we got to worry about every time. So let's go between a big object and a little object. Again, I still have to combine them. Select one, shift select the other, mesh, combine. Now they're one. Now I connect the faces. Again, grab this face, grab that face, edit mesh, bridge, and you can see it kind of connects it there. Again, more divisions will give it a smoother connection. We can taper it. And of course, we got that crazy twist function in there. But you can see even objects of different sizes can be connected to each other. All right. Now here's the funkiest use of the bridge tool. I think you guys are going to love this one just because it's so weird. But make sure, in terms of your bridge tool, we're going to go to the options box. And what I want you to do is make sure you've got smooth path and curve as your option for the bridge type. Smooth path and curve. All right. Now again, this works the same way. I want to connect these two things together. So first I have to combine them. Then I grab the faces on one end, hold shift, grab the faces on the other end so they're all selected. Edit mesh, bridge. Now, when I create the bridge with that curve option, you'll see this thing here. What the heck is that? Looks like something broke. It's sticking out. That can't be good. That is actually another kind of geometry. It's called NURBS geometry. You guys ever heard of NURBS? By a show of hands, how many of you guys have heard of NURBS? Okay. NURBS are basically another kind of material that you can build things out of, right? Like from our world, let's say I want a salad bowl. I can have a salad bowl made of glass. I can have a salad bowl made of wood. I can have a salad bowl made of metal. Just, do I want to put it in the microwave? Do I want to put it in the dishwasher? Do I want to impress my tree hugger friends? So that's how I decide which kind of bowl I want, right? Well, modeling is the same. We can build things out of polygons. We can build things out of NURBS. We can build things out of subdivisions. These are just materials that we can build stuff out, right? So in terms of geometry, this is polygon geometry. This is a piece of NURBS geometry. And NURBS, just so you understand, because the name is weird, NURBS. NURBS stands for non-uniform rational B-spline. That's what NURBS stands for. I'm sure that made a lot of sense to some engineers, but that's what NURBS stands for. Now, you're looking at that like, but that's a line that doesn't look like geometry. Well, here's the cool thing about NURBS geometry. It does have structure to it like this in some instances, but some bits of NURBS geometry are not like planes or series of faces. They are, and that's what this is a NURBS curve. Has anybody ever heard of NURBS curves before? NURBS curves? Okay, NURBS curves are the idea that you can literally draw a line in Maya and you can pick it up. It's like physical. And you can bend it like wire to make different shapes with it. And that's what this curve is. It's a piece of wire, basically. But this wire has a job. It's actually connected to my polygon geometry in terms of its shape. So I can manipulate the shape of the curve and it will manipulate the shape of the geometry. What? Nope, it's true. Let me show you. I'm going to hide my geometry for a second just so you can see the NURBS curve. So I'm going to go to show and uncheck polygons. And you can see there's my NURBS curve. And I can put it into object mode just like polygons. And you see this is the curve. It's a physical entity. I can move it. It also has components just like polygons have components. If I hold down my right mouse button, I can get to the control vertices. And that's these sort of pinkish purple things, which I can grab and using my move tool, move them, and it changes the shape of the curve. Right? So how does this relate to my polygons? I don't get it. Well, let me bring back my polygons. Now, in terms of this tool, bridge. In terms of this tool, again, this looks weird because it's connecting straight, but that's because my divisions are 0. So Maya's going from A to B, shortest distance, least amount of effort. If I put my cursor over divisions like I did before and drag with the left mouse button, I add divisions, and that adds to the smoothness to which these are connected. But here's what I want to show you, and here's the really fun part. I'm going to grab the control vertex of my curve and watch what happens when I move it and what it does to my geometry. Does that make sense? I'm literally using the curve to change the shape of my polygon geometry. And in terms of moving around, you might be wondering, how am I getting from CV to CV? What I'm doing is I'm using my up and down arrows on my keyboard to jump from one to the next, because a NURBS curve is actually a linear mathematical equation. It has a beginning and an end. And as you go up through the hierarchy, you're moving mathematically to the next one, up or down. There is a direction with which these curves flow. But something that you will notice pretty easily is if you're moving the CVs at the end or the beginning of your geometry, you'll see that the result is pretty bad. So you really don't want to move those guys. But if you move the ones that are sort of more towards the middle, you can get a better result in terms of the appearance of the shape change than if you move the ones at the ends. It has a tendency to give you not such a great result. But could you maybe use this to make a handle on a teapot? Maybe. That might come in handy. Maybe not. But it's another way to try to make that thing. It's another tool that could make a difference. Maybe not. But good to know. Another thing you can put in your little belt of things you know how to do. Does that make sense? Bridge tool. Yes. Yeah, the curve doesn't show up unless you choose smooth path and curve at the creation. Yeah, in the options box, you're gonna have to move the little marker to the, I think it's the third one down. So check it out. And then the curve will be created and then you'll be able to manipulate it just like that. All right, again, none of this stuff is like earth shattering and it's gonna change how your world works, but it's just one more little thing you can play with, one more little option you can try if other stuff is not panning out for you. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right, now, are you guys ready to see here and talk about your skill check? All right, skill check. You will be creating either a snowman or snow woman, your choice, or both, I'm fine with that. And there are parameters, there always are. You have to use either combining the geometry and merging the vertices, or Boolean's operations, or using the bridge tool. You can use any one of those, but you have to use those because I want to see that A, you could use those tools, and B, you still have good edge flow when you're all done. So you're gonna have to go back and fix it, make sure it's quadded and looks neat. Does that make sense? So any one of those three tools, totally fine, or all three if you want. Let me show you some examples of some stuff we've gotten. Hi, Mark.
You're a funny guy.
Here's the thing. I have figured out the secret to life,
Humor.
and that is you're here to entertain yourself. If anybody else gets it, awesome, good for them. If they don't, that's okay. So have a good time, entertain yourself, and everything's gonna be okay. Let's take a look at oh, Marcus.
You should blame this on you having puppies.
You should blame that on me having puppies. All right, so let's take a look
You
at.
didn't even bring the puppies for me to play with.
I know. I wish I
I'm
could.
Taking up lecture time.
No, that's all right. We're having a good time. So here's an example of a snowman. And you can see it's not overly complicated, but what you'll notice is, again, the edges match up. Things are connected neatly and cleanly. You know, we've got good shape and form. The face isn't necessarily part of the object. That's okay. I just want to see that you can use those three tools that we looked at today to create something, even though this isn't necessarily the most efficient way to model something. In some instances, it's quite handy, like especially like this snowman. This would be very hard to extrude and get all of this. Way easier to do this utilizing Booleans, for example. So in some instances, you have to make things that are very challenging. Oh, actually, I have a picture of something. I found a picture that I thought would be really handy in demonstrating something that would be very challenging to do. You know, modeling the legs of this robot would really be a hassle unless you were using like Booleans. That would make it way easier to make that. So here's an instance where that would come in handy. Danger, danger. But So there's one snowman. I got another one that I know you're gonna like in my cache of funny little things that people have made. Here's another little snowman I got. It's summer. So if you like warm hugs, there's a nice snow person. This one's really funky too. I like this one a lot. Look at that guy. Right? So feel feel free to have fun, do something interesting. Again, these assignments that are wide open, more freedom to be creative, which is good. So try to have a good time with it. Create something interesting and different. Because I love these. I know Marcus is the same way, and Brian, we show each other like, oh, look at this one. Look at what we got. So it's always cool to see what you guys come up with, because they're quite cool sometimes. So any questions about your skill check? What do you have to do? How does it go down? No. Good. Okay, so we get our skill check. That's awesome. Your week 2 turn-in is coming up soon, right? When's that thing due? Tomorrow at midnight. Here's what I would very strongly suggest you guys do. Try to get your week 2 done as soon as you can. If you can get that done like today, this afternoon, do it. Start working on week 3 now. Does that make sense? Like as soon as you turn it in, boom, go right to 3. Because 3 is going to take more time. And it's going to feel like you don't have as much time to do it. Does that make sense? Class is winding down. The weeks start compressing. So the sooner you get on that, the better. Believe me, you will be happier in the long run if you can do that. So I recommend very highly get on that. And as always, before you turn this stuff in, run it past Brian or Marcus or myself. We'd be more than happy to look at your models and say, hey, that looks good. Oh, this should actually be 2 pieces, not 1. Because there's a such thing. Made in parts doesn't mean, yeah, it's made in parts. Is it made in the right number of parts? Is what we should have worded it, because that's the reality, the right number of parts. So, is this made of the right number of pieces? Did you remember to delete your history and freeze transformations? Did you name the file right? Sometimes when you're tired, you overlook that stuff. Second set of eyes, not to mention somebody to blame it on, always a good idea, right? So let us see your work, and we can give you some feedback on it. Make sure you're on the right path, right? And then remember, this is the week 2 turn-in, so you got to click the tab for week 2 on your self-grade document, the student self-grade. Make sure you're looking at the right tab, because we're asking for more stuff week 2, even more stuff week 3, because we incorporate the need for the bevel tool in there. All right. Was there a question? I thought there was. Oh, you figured it out. Awesome. That's the best way to do it. The stuff you figure out on your own, you never forget. All righty. Well, I think that's it. Did you guys have anything else for me? Are we good? All right, then. Let's get that stuff done. Oh, this Saturday. Saturday's the next one, right? Saturday. This Saturday, we are going to start talking about UVs and UV mapping. This is a very important day that you be in here with your A game. So get some sleep Friday night as much as you can. Eat decently, drink enough water, come in invigorated and ready to learn, because UVs are challenging. The process is the hard part. Like the broad concepts are not that bad, but the steps, you've got to have all of those steps written down. And I know, there's some people who are like, I'm not really a notes guy. You need to be a notes guy on Saturday. You've got to write these steps down, because if you are missing any of those steps, you're dead in the water. Like literally, until you get help, you can't move forward. This is not a close enough kind of thing. You either got it or you don't. So bring your A game on Saturday, take notes, make sure you understand, because it's tricky. And UV mapping is something you're going to have to do for the rest of your career as a modeler. So good to get good foundational skills in now, so that you can progress forward with all your future classes, because they're going to have you UV map your model. gonna happen. We need to get it here so that we can use it every class moving forward. All right, so good job, guys. Thank you very much. I will see you on Saturday, and we will be doing UV mapping. Goodbye, my digital friends. See you later. Bye. Don't be sad. It's okay. Yeah, I know. Well, you know what? Take solace in the fact that good things have to end, but that also means bad things have to end. So when something terrible is happening, realize, okay, it's going to have to end. So there's a comfort in that. And you're welcome to all the fish, Clint. Alrighty, guys. I will talk to you later. Have a great day. Model, model, model. I'll see you on Saturday.